9.5 years, and there's other things, and the sunspots didn't correlate. So they're trying to look for explanations, and the dominant, in the 20th century, of course, the dominant one has been the group one. Something within the market, something within capitalism causes this. Causes an inflationary period where there's money supply increases, prices increase, increased productive activity, everybody's happy, and all of a sudden, bingo, there's a collapse, there's bankruptcies, unemployment, prices fall, and this is a terrible thing, and the government should step in and iron it out, which is the usual conclusion. So one of the indictments of free market capitalism is it causes business cycles, causes inflation, unemployment, and all the rest of it. And I would say most economists today still hold this in one form or another. The Keynesian variant, which we might go into, is that what happens is that the market economy doesn't spend enough. And because of that, in recessions, and therefore, it spends too much in inflations, and therefore, you have to have something outside the system which can correct this. Of course, that's good old Papa's government. So like the god out of the machine, which comes in and corrects everything. If people spend too much, absorb, as the great Keynesian phrase, which I love particularly, sop up excess purchasing power. So like the bounty of the better pick up. So, and if the people out there don't spend enough, you pump spending in order to get the juices going. So that's the government, as I say, steps in as the corrector of laws. In the Keynesian theory, by the way, Keynes had no theory of the business cycle. He didn't say why there's underspending, overspending. He said, at one point, he said investment increases because of animal spirits, and then it decreases with animal spirits, I guess, collapse. So at any rate, so there's no theory of the business cycle. He simply said, we don't know what causes the business cycle. We do know, however, it's caused by inflation, is caused by overspending, depression is caused by underspending, therefore the government says, it's the job of the government is to pump spending in and sop it up. And so the metaphor I like to use to explain the Keynesian doctrine is that the government is sort of like the wheel of a car. The economy is the car. The economy is going around this tightrope or this ledge, very narrow ledge. On one side is the abyss of depression. The other side is the other abyss of the quagmire, the mountain cliff, or whatever, inflation. And even though the Keynesians, at least non-leftist Keynesians, moderate Keynesians will admit the free market works very well in the microsphere, the sphere I've been talking about before, the supply and demand intersecting and clearing the market, all that. That's great, they said. Free market's good micro, but macro is total chaos. There's no equilibrating process in the macrosphere. There's nothing which will keep the economy an even keel. And therefore we need the government to adjust it, to come in and fix everything up. Okay, as a matter of fact, I'm going to go into that, because this is, every macro textbook has inflicted this upon you, so I think I'm going to go into this. There's millions of words that were written about it, lots of equations, but the essence of it is very simple. You find the essence of all this stuff, and you penetrate to the core, it's quite simple. One thing is, when Keynes' general theory came out, I went to college, it was about 6 years after Keynes' general theory came out. Nobody understood what the hell he was saying. I mean, nobody. Because it seemed very peculiar. On one page he said that the key to my thought is that savings always equals investment. Always equals investment. Key. 2 pages later he said the key to my thought is savings always differs from investment. Well, I mean, how do you grapple with this? So, since Keynes had already established a reputation as a big shot, as a distinguished intellectual and economist, therefore he couldn't be wrong, couldn't be absurd or whatever. He must be something. There must be something deep in the new jargon he created, all sorts of new phrases, marginal capacity to consume, multiplier, all that. And the older economists said the guy's full of prunes and forgot it. The younger economists who were emerging out of in graduate school, young professors said, aha, this is it. And they started figuring out what the master meant. Sure of heart that the master was right. If you read the introduction of Samuelson's most famous Keynesian, I guess, around now, I think it was his Foundations of Economic Analysis, I believe, or also his first edition of the economics textbook. he said what a great joy it was, what a wonderful thing to be under 35 when Keynes' general theory came out, because he was young enough to appreciate this great revelation, this great truth which has emerged upon the world. So it took about, I would say about 10 years, well, more than 10, 15 years before the Keynesians figured out what he was saying, to try to rationalize this and make it consistent. As soon as they did that, the whole Keynesian theory began to collapse around the edges. As soon as it was fairly clear to them what he said. They're still arguing about what Keynes really meant. There are conservatives who think Keynes didn't really mean what the Keynesians said he meant. I personally think he didn't mean it if he meant anything at all. I mean, the Keynesians were the only person who made any sense whatsoever out of this mishmash, this total muck. All right, there are no Keynesian diagrams in general theory. You won't find a diagram in it, just it's all verbiage, incoherent verbiage. And the interesting thing is Keynes was a good writer. I mean, qua writer, he's very, very good. But when you get to the general theory, I think the incoherence of the thought was kind of profound influence on the incoherence of the language.
How old was he when he wrote it?
Huh?
How old was he when he wrote it?
Well, it was fairly elderly at that point. He died by 1945, I think, so he's sort of 36. I guess he was 50s, 60s, something like that. 60s, something like that. At any rate, the famous Keynesian cross. Instead of having price on the y-axis and quantity on the x-axis, something different happens now. You've got dollars, both axes, each one being national income, or whatever.
That's gross national product.
Spending, yeah, it's the same stuff. It's just slight variation. Yeah.
Does anybody mean the gross national product?
Eh?
Gross national product, is that Keynes' idea?
Yeah. More or less, well, the statisticians discovered a little bit before that, but Keynes needed the concepts in order to develop the theory. You can believe in the gross national product without being Keynesian, but you can't be a Keynesian without believing in the gross national product, put it that way. The national income and the whole approach. So, the axes are the same. Key thing, billions of dollars or whatever, billions of francs or whatever. The axes are identical. So this is 100, that's 100, the same distance. So since the axes are identical, you then have a 45-degree angle, which is also identical. Right? So this is 100, 100. So the coordinates are 100, 100, 200, 200, or whatever, going on up. So this 45-degree line then becomes national income, or gross national product, or whatever, variant doesn't make any difference. All right, so the Keynesian theory. Well, all right. So let's say national income. Let's say people receive. How much will people spend? Okay, this person gets $10,000 a year. He'll spend maybe less, maybe more, somewhere fluctuating around there. There's no particular law you can think of to equilibrate spending and income. Something saying, well, they spend less, they'll save it. They spend more, they're going to debt or whatever. Keynes is trying to get a theory of a macro optimum here, macro equilibrium, so to speak. His theory was that expenditures out of income will have a certain function. Expenditures are a certain function of income. And it's a function shaped like so. It's flatter. The expenditure function is flatter than the national income function, which is called Y for some unknown reason. They couldn't call it I because I is already taken for investment, symbol for investment. So they made it Y. So now this is not self-evident, to say the very least. I mean, if you think of expenditure as a function of income, if, for example, people received last year $500 billion, they'll probably spend around $500 million, maybe less, maybe more. Let's say less. But whatever, there's no reason to assume that we'll be spending much more than income as you keep going to the left at some point, and much less than income as you keep going to the right at some point. It's much more likely to be something like some zone around here, right? There's no reason, if you look at it sort of rationally, there's no reason to think there's any kind of point there. And how Keynes got to the point, we'll see as we develop this. So then you have this is income expenditure. Then he said, well, if income is higher than this point, let's say it's, I don't know, $300 billion. If income is higher than this, people spend less, and as you keep going, as income keeps going up, you spend less and less. What happens to the money, by the way? As Rand would say, blank out. The money in the Keynesian phrase leaks out of the economy, so it disappears. One Keynesian used the term bathtub. It's like a leaky bathtub. You've got money pouring in, and a whole bunch of money leaks out. Therefore, it's not around to fuel the economy. Right? It leaks. All right. So this leakage, what Keynes calls saving. Saving is the thing that leaks out. Now, the only possible sense you can make out of that is to say people just pile money out, hoard it. The old-fashioned concept of hoarding. They just have it there. They have the dollar bills or the gold coins. They just keep it there, under the floorboards. But that's supposed to happen in order to keep going. So you have this concept of the leakage, right? And then you have, if the economy is down here, if you have, let's say, $100 billion national income, people spend $200 billion. Where do they get the money from? How do you have a situation? Consider yourself. People are receiving in payment $100 billion. They spend $200 billion. Where the hell do they get the money? Okay? Supposedly from under the floorboards, some from heaven. Again, as I say, blank out. All right? So, all right. The only sense made out of the Keynesians who worked out these diagrams, the only sense they made out was this. They said, well, Keynes was thinking about two different things. He was looking at a time dimension, and he said as follows. Let's say national income is 500 billion here. So if you look at it as a time dimension, day one, year one, whatever you want to call it, some time period, let's say year one. Income is 500 billion. It's this expenditure is 400 billion. The rest of it leaks out. The rest of it's piled up in hoards. It's under the floorboards or whatever. So that means that since expenditure equals income, okay, this is the other part of the thing. How can it differ? How can it be the same? Well, it's the same as follows. All right, here's the way to build that up. I spend 30 cents for a newspaper. I talk about how both parties benefit. If you don't concentrate on a newspaper, just talk about the money. Okay. Here's me. I spend my expenditure, small e, is equal to 30 cents. And then news dealer's income, in a gross sense of money coming in into his pocket, is 30 cents. Small y. Okay, so expenditure, every time anybody spends any money, my expenditure is by definition equal to his income and determines it. The expenditure of the money is the active force. We're looking at the money. So I spend the 30 cents, he gets it. My 30 cents I spend is exactly equal to his 30 cents that he gets, except he drops it down the grade of the railing or something. It's rare. So therefore, expenditure is identical with income and also determines income. Expenditure is the active force if you're looking at money income. Okay, so, okay, fine. Then what they do is they aggregate the whole economic system. Every person in the economy spends money over a certain time period, a year. So this is called capital E, which is the sum of all the small e's. And capital Y is the sum of all the small y's. And therefore, capital E has got to be identical to capital Y. I've got to determine it. All right. I mean, all this I think is true. I don't know what to get you particularly. It might be interesting for some statistical purposes, right? So the people spend during the year $500 billion. But they have income. They spend $400 billion. What happens to the $400 billion? That becomes income. In other words, expenditure is the active force. You spend $400 billion. National income is $400 billion. What happened to the other $100 billion? Leaked away. Right? So this means that year two, the next year, income is $400 billion. In other words, the only thing that makes sense out of Keynes saying on one page expenditure always equals income, on the next page expenditure always differs from income. Let's look at it in a different time dimension. And what he was saying was, this year's expenditure determines next year's income, or this month's expenditure determines next month's income. Right? So you have a ratchet effect. Income is 500. 100 leaks away somewhere. So the next year, income is only 400. So you're now down at 400. And then you have a free will decision by the masses. How much do you spend out of the 400? You spend, when you look at it, it's a function of income. According to the postulate, it's not proven, well, just postulated expenditures like this. This is down to 350. So you spend 350. Year 3, income is 350. This is here. And in a couple of years or so, you get back to this 300, which is equilibrium. At 300, whatever that is, year 5 or something, expenditure is 300, income is 300, and expenditure will again be 300. And there you are, your equilibrium national income, famous Keynesian macro equilibrium. So, if on the other hand you start from below that, you're here at 100 billion, 250 billion, let's say. The income is 150 billion. This is year 1. This is, yeah, this is a 4-year one. Okay, so income 150 billion. How much do people spend? They spend 250 billion. Where do they get the money from? They take it out of the leak, or whatever, out of the leaky bathtub. They take it out of the boards, they take it out of the mattress. They spend 250 billion.
But if they can spend an extra 100 now, why couldn't they spend an extra 100 and expend 450 or 500 back in year 2 over there?
I mean, you're saying why is expenditure supposed to be a flat function of income? Good question. I don't know.
This is absolute garbage.
Well, I'm trying to explain how he gets to this. That each step is garbage. I mean, the conclusion is garbage, and each step is garbage. Right?
And there's no need to try and understand it rationally because it is garbage.
I think you should understand
We
rationally.
argue with these people
Sure.
all the time. We don't understand what their terms
Yeah,
even mean.
understand how they get to what, like what the basis of the whole thing is. So, the next year 2 then, income is equal to expenditure. In other words, look at a little algebra here. Expenditure sub n is equal to and determines y sub n plus y. Okay? And then out of that, you make your free will decision how much to spend. So you're getting down, so this is now 250 up here. People spend 280. Expenditure is still higher than income, but less so. You're taking some more out of the floorboards, out of leaking out of the pool, or whatever it is. And et cetera, et cetera. And finally, year 4 or 5, you get to 300 again, where this is 300, that's 300, this is 300. And there you are, equilibrium national income. Well, aside from the leakage part, which is obviously insane to begin with, I mean, people do not do this in practice. You don't have a statistic that shows that national income is 300 billion, people spend 500 billion next year. Okay, they ain't got the money. Aside from that, how can this thing ever change? How does this change here? But supply and demand, you know how things change. The prices, the equilibrium price, it changes either the supply change or demand change. This is only one function. Expenditure and income. How the hell do you ever get out of this? That's an interesting point. I don't think, if there is such a function, you can never get out of it. National income should stay the same forever. Alright, so,
where do you get it's even going to be constant, though?
Huh?
I mean, where do you get it's even going to be constant?
They have to prove a couple of things. They have to prove that it's stable function. Its function should be in some sense stable. Okay? They also have to prove that it's flat, like that. Neither is self-evident, neither is true. Okay? I'm exploring more and more of this insanity as we keep on with this. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I'm lost. Where does the 100 go? Okay, it's somewhere.
What,
does it ever reappear?
Well, it could reappear over here if you're down here somehow.
They don't explain.
How can you
just say explain?
It's gone.
It gets put into mattresses and it gets extracted later on.
You're not supposed to ask that question.
You're trying to look at this rationally. I mean, it's not.
Okay, it's just as long as I can be lost.
Right.
From the mattress fires due to smoking.
Right.
So I mean, if you could spend the extra 100 over there, why can't you spend it over here? Thinking, no, I think.
That's another question I'm supposed to ask.
Because it's a fixed function. It's a determined function in some way. Why is it a determined function? Well, we'll see why they think it's
well, if this on the right is true, then how do you ever get to the left?
Who knows? I don't see how you ever get out of here. Once you're there. Well, you have to assume a change in the function, which they do. I mean, it's very, very peculiar because you only have one function, one independent thing. It's Supply and demand have two things going on, supply and demand. You can talk about intersection. There's only one thing going on. It's a very odd kind of concept.
And the other thing is that whilst it may well be true that because of reporting purposes and collection of data, that in fact you've got the time delay there, but nevertheless, that the moment that I spend $1 on something, the other person receives it. So there's no delay inherent in the transaction.
Well, it's called a Robertsonian day. D.H. Robertson is kind of an interesting guy. He was Keynes hated him, but anyway, he had a concept of time period as abstract days. A day defined as you get income, you can't spend it until tomorrow. So he thought in terms of day, but if you take a day 1, day 2, it looks pretty ridiculous. So that was it's sort of an abstract thing where obviously it doesn't happen. In the real world, you're spending money, getting money all the time.
Most people spend it before they get
it. So for that reason alone, this thing is sort of shot. Anyway, you have to assume abstract time periods where everybody gets a lot of money and doesn't spend it until the next time period. So you can call this day 1, day 2, day 3 if you want to. Month, week 1, week 2, week 3. So
this is a serious theory.
It's very serious. It ran the whole world for 50 years, from the late 30s to the mid 70s.
I know it did.
This is still a major. I would say most economists are now still Keynesian, even though Keynesianism is sort of pretty dead from the neck up, very confused. It's still clinging to this.
Galbraith is an advisor, an economic advisor to our Prime Minister. I don't know if this is garbage too, but it's like...
Galbraith is also a Keynesian on top of everything else. He doesn't stress it.
Forbes magazine, I think it was, did an article a little while ago on Keynes and Schumpeter.
Schumpeter. Yeah, it was Peter Drucker. Did that. Yeah, it wasn't too good. I thought Drucker was pushing Schumpeter for the wrong reasons. So, yeah, it was an interesting article. I didn't buy it. At any rate, so let's assume this is correct for a minute. Let's assume there is an equilibrium. There's stuck at the opinion. Who the hell really cares? What difference does it make? Okay? That's the second step in this mighty theory here, edifice. It makes a difference for the following reason, according to the Keynesians. Production is 1-to-1 correlation with national income. And employment is a 1-to-1 correlation with production. So that, ipso facto, QED or whatever, the higher the national income, the more the production, the higher production, the higher employment. The lower national income, the lower production, the lower employment. Severe unemployment problems, the lower national income. If you look at that, you look at this thing, it seems to be totally obvious, total garbage. National income has gone up for, tenfold in the last 100 years or something. Employment remains the same. There's no difference in employment. Why should employment have anything to do with national income? What's going on here? Even production is hardly have a 1-to-1 correlation with spending. So there are a couple of hidden assumptions here, which are a clinker. It took until 1950, a whole series of equations for Franco Mugliani, distinguished Italian-American Keynesian, to come out and figure out how Keynes gets to this thing where employment depends on national income, where the lower the national income, the more unemployment. And the hidden assumption there, the clinker in the arm, which is one of the beginnings of this, at least the retreat from Keynesianism among the high theorists. Okay, they looked at this thing and they finally understood all the equations, how they all fit together, and they come, my God, he's assuming rigid wage rates downward. The assumption is, which is Britain in those days was fairly accurate in a sense, that wage rates can only go up, they can't fall. Why can't they fall? Well, those are institutional reasons. Unions, government minimum wage laws, unemployment insurance, all these things keep wages from falling. Okay? Wage rates are fixed downward. Now he makes some sense out of some of this stuff. Namely, that if national income is 300 billion, there's a big deflation, let's say. Let's say the money supply is, because Keynes doesn't talk about the money supply, let's say money supply is cut in half, and prices and wages are cut in half, more or less. Everybody should be more or less in the same position. It shouldn't be any big problem, after a certain transition period. But if wage rates remain the same as they were when money and prices and everything else was double, then of course you have a real problem, because unemployment is a function of wage rates. So that if demand for labor, so to speak, is cut in half and wage rates are stay at the original level, then you do have very heavy unemployment. It has nothing to do with the free market. It has nothing to do with the alleged need of the free market for the steering wheel. It means because wage rates are rigid downward by exogenous union and government forces. So it's a very different. If Keynes had admitted that from the very beginning, it would have been a very different sort of kind of story. It would mean that the onus of unemployment rests on government rather than on the free market. Okay, but it took a long, as I say, 15 years to realize this was the hidden assumption. And even then, they weren't very happy about this. The Keynesians sort of so tucked under, some kind of lemma there, corollary. Okay, so rigid wage rates downward become a key to this. The unemployment problem. Okay, so, and it became then pretty evident that the whole Keynesian trick was to solve depression by creating inflation, by creating increasing money supply, by increasing prices, so as to trick unions and the workers into accepting lower real wage rates while the money wage rates remain the same. That the essence of political Keynesianism. It's a whole bunch of trickery. It's duplicity on a mammoth scale. It's people who claim they love the working classes, and meantime they're inflating prices higher than wage rates, so the real wage rates in terms of purchasing power go down. So the unemployment problem was then solved in a very tricky and roundabout fashion. Okay, so that's the political essence of Keynesianism, underneath all the camouflage. Continue on with the theory here. How does he get the? Well, first place, one of the things that happened was he said the Keynesians in the 1930s said, well, the economy's mired here, or finished, etc., etc. You have to have mammoth government spending to what? Increase. Well, go this way. Continue on with this thing. Income, expenditure. There's some line here, the so-called full employment line, magic full employment line, which is somewhere, say here. This is a line at which unemployment is wiped out if you keep increasing national income. Okay? If expenditure is such that the intersection point is below the full employment line, you have permanent depression. There's no way the free market economy can get out of it. They're stuck with the expenditure function. And there they are. They should have this $500 billion, let's say $500 billion national income is the key to full employment. We're stuck at 300. Therefore what? Therefore the government, the gone out of the machine, steps in and spends 200 extra billion to raise the expenditure function. So we just hit the full employment line. So you just fine-tune the system.
No wonder it's called corruption.
Yeah. The government spends $200 billion and adding to total spending so as to raise the thing to the $200 billion. For the magic full employment. Nobody knows where the full employment line is, by the way. Who the hell knows where it is? But anyway, if you're in a depression, you assume it must be to the right of where we are now, so you pump in a lot of spending. If, on the other hand, the Keynesians were not very strong on inflation. They weren't very keen on analyzing it. They were interested in depression. But what am I doing? Full employment line is fixed. Sorry. If the expenditure line is higher, okay, at the intersection point is say 600 billion, that means that there's inflation. This causes inflation. If you're to the right of the full employment line, you have inflation. Left of the full employment line, you have depression. Is permanent. We're stuck. We're mired in this evil expenditure function, which is no self-equilibrator as the microsphere has. Therefore, government gone out of the machine comes in, pumps in spending, or takes it out, sops up our excess purchasing power, and does what with it? Destroys it, burns it, who knows? So, okay, where does the government get the money from? Essentially, that's blackout also. Okay? Government spends it, it creates by deficits. It has also, in inflation, it has surpluses. Now, the original Keynesians were kind of cute about this. They said, we have a business cycle, something like this. Old fuddy-duddy reactionaries are in favor of balanced budget. Well, we are in favor of balanced budget too, just we're not limited to the terms of the concept of the year. We believe in balancing budget over the entire cycle. Saying there's 4 years of depression, we spend money, we have deficits, then there's 4 years of inflation, we have surpluses, which sop up the old deficits. So over an 8 or 10 year period, we have a balanced budget, This is called the concept of a cyclically balanced budget. What's happened to the concept of security knowledge about it? It's down the old Orwell memory hole. Okay? Nobody talks about it. No Keynesian textbooks write about it, because obviously there ain't no balanced budget. There's either a very big deficit or a slightly less big deficit. Okay? So the concept of a surplus is gone also. Nobody talks about a budget surplus anymore. You don't check inflation by budget surplus. You check it by slightly reducing the deficit. Okay. Now, how do they get at this thing? How do they arrive at this flat function? There are two things they have to support in some way. The expenditure function is flat and therefore has an intersection at one point, and it's stable, so you can even talk about it. Well, in the first place, the first thing that happened with Keynesians came in about 1945 with Simon Kuznets, who's not one of my favorite economists, is sort of an establishment statistician. He said, well, gee, if you look at it over time, over the last 150-year period, consumption doesn't go like this. National income increases, expenditure doesn't go like that. Expenditure is more or less the same proportion of national income as it always was. Therefore, expenditure function rises secularly in the long run. Keynesians say, yeah, you're right. Over a long period, expenditure keeps rising to meet income, and therefore, you don't have a sort of 100-year depression. It's only 20 years or something like that. It's the first big concession of Keynesians. Okay, yeah. Maybe we can get out of this after 20 years. Anyway, how do they get to this thing? Well, they get to this expenditure function as follows. I think in the history of economic thought, this might be the biggest single racket. Biggest single collection of fallacies. They're tough to really judge it with this. Okay. You have this allegedly flat expenditure function. They arrive at it as follows. Well, expenditure consists of two kinds of expenditure. There's investment, and there's consumption. Right? Investment is on capital goods and whatever consumption. Consumer goods, consumption is about 90% of investment, 95, 80, whatever it is. Investment, Keynes had no theory of investment. Investment is free floating, it's animal spirits, it's free will. Investment is free will. It's volatile, it's kooky, it's whatever, booms and busts. Okay? There's no determined law of investment. Consumption, however, is different. Consumption is fixed and determined, like so. Flat, intersecting at certain points.
Is that another one of their arbitrary assumptions?
Yeah, well, we're going back beyond the arbitrary assumption of expenditure function. They don't talk about expenditure function, they talk about consumption function. But this is essentially what they're saying. Saying that expenditure function, which can be broken down into two parts. Investment, which is constant here because it's not a function, it's free will. Okay? And consumption, which is determined passive, because consumers are determined passive jerks or whatever. And they have this kind of a function. It's stable, consumption function. If supply and demand is the famous phrase for microeconomics, the famous phrase for Keynes is consumption function. It sort of gets you at least a D in a test. That's the word. Right? So, consumption function is flattish and it's stable. Why is it flat and stable? Right? It pushes it back another. And by the way, you see what happens then is investment is free will, consumption is passive determined. And what else is free will in the world? Government. Government expenditure is very free will. They got free will out the yang. Okay? So government then steps in, you see, and supplies the efficient expenditure. Therefore, government spending is honorary investment. It's considered the same thing as investment because it's free will. Consumers are passive and determined, investors are free will, but volatile and sort of undependable. And government is free will and rational. And that steps in and corrects these flaws of the free market.
Good thing, too.
Yes, absolutely. Okay.
I mean, where would we be with
Where would we be? Right. Okay, so how do they get this consumption function, the C plus I and all that? Well, the stability, well, the shape of the consumption, notice the key to this thing is it has to have an intersection point. If it doesn't have an intersection point, the whole thing washes out. They got it from budget studies. It's a very interesting methodological leap. 1935 or 36, the Department of Labor, I think it was, had budget study. What they did is they investigated people's incomes and their consumption. Okay? And they found out, not I think unsurprisingly, this has nothing to do with national income. These are people's income, groups of people. Okay? They found out that if you go up, if this is income classes, This is as you. And this is. You have this national income. Well, it shouldn't be national. As the let's say this is income here. This is consumption here. That if you're wealthy people tended to have spend a much higher proportion. Excuse me. Wealthy people tended to spend a much lower proportion of income than poor people. In other words, you have something like this. This is the 45-degree line again. You have something like people who make a. Let's say David Rockefeller. His income is maybe $50 million a year. He doesn't spend it all on consumption. He spends like maybe $10 million on consumption, $40 million he saves or invests. All right. So you have then much lower consumption rate, consumption proportion, and in middle classes it was closer to the line, and something like that. And then you get the poor people. You find that lower income people spend more than they take in. So if somebody makes $2,000 a year, he spends $6,000. You have this kind of a function. If you're dealing with income classes within the same period, same year, therefore they said, see, that's the consumption function. Now, there are many things wrong with this. One is, these are not dealing with national income, they're dealing with groups of people within the same national income. It's a very entirely different thing. It's true that a rich person might spend less, consume less than a poor person. It doesn't mean that if everybody is richer, everybody will consume less than before. Two totally different things. This whole thing gives you one point on this graph. It doesn't give you the whole graph. So that's one big problem. It doesn't establish a damn thing. Secondly, as Milton Friedman pointed out, actually Milton Friedman was probably his biggest contribution to economics, is the so-called the permanent consumption function. He said, look, people don't spend money, but they consider how much to consume out of their current income. They don't only consider their current income, they consider what their income was 2 years ago and will be 2 years from now. Suppose you have the best-selling author, for example, Irving Wallace. Let's say he writes a top novel every 5 years. If he gets $1 million 1 year, he's not going to spend all of it that year, okay, and have zero. He's going to allocate over a 5-year period, so that if you catch Irving Wallace in his flush year, he'll be spending consuming way below his income. On the other hand, if you catch him a year when he's making zero and spending $500,000 a year, he's here somewhere. It's a distorted picture. If you take a 5-year period, you take these same income groups and take their income over a 5-year period, you get a very different statistic. So Friedman essentially did that and found out, lo and behold, that if you do that, everything changes. And so this budget study thing shifts from this to something like that. So the people who really have low incomes for 5 years spend less than their income. Where the hell do they get the money from? Of course, that's another interesting question. If you're really poor, you don't have $2 million in little floorboards, and you don't get permanent credit either. I mean, you can get some credit from friends, neighbors, or storekeepers. But, pretty soon it washes out. You got to keep getting some income. So the whole thing, when you start correcting to the so-called permanent income, you get a consumption function like this, much more intelligent, and there's no intersection point. The intersection point washes out. Keynesianism is wiped out on that basis alone. Plus, half those other things we're talking about. And plus the fact it doesn't really pertain to national income changes. So that takes care of the concept of flatness. What about the stability? How do they get the stability thing? Why should it be stable? They get that from this. They take, for 30 years or so, you take national income. Okay, this is one of the great. This is sort of like Keynesianism is like in many ways like a walking mathematical fallacy, statistical fallacy. This is over different years. You take income, national income, and consumption, and plot them. Okay, and you get something like that. It's all around the same amount. In other words, the deviation, the variation around the correlation is very small. If, on the other hand, you plot national income with saving or investment, you get a much bigger variation. You get something like that. Conclusion was that consumption is a very stable function of income because there's a very small variance around it, whereas investment or saving is a very volatile and free will. That's the it's really investment. Investment is volatile and free will because the correlation is, the variance around it is much greater. The trick here, the gimmick involved is if you take something and correlate it with 95% of itself, you get a very high correlation. Okay? It looks very stable. It doesn't really mean a damn thing. If, on the other hand, you correlate something with 5% of itself, you get a lot of variance. Looks like it's unstable. That is the hooker. That's the key to the Keynesian function. Okay? If you correlate something with 90% of itself, it looks stable. Correlate with 5% or 10% of itself, it looks unstable. So my little satiric thing, which I have in many constant state, reducing this to reductio ad absurdum is as follows. Why only have we investment plus consumption? Those aren't the only things which make up a national income. All right? Take national income, and is equal to income of Brooklyn, B, plus income of every other place except Brooklyn. Call it E for every, no, well, it's call it V for everybody. Right? So, and you correlate the two things. If you correlate national income with all income except Brooklyn, this is about 99% of that, let's say 95% of that, 99%. If you correlate national income with everything except Brooklyn, you get a very, something like that. Very high correlation, almost no variation around it, almost invisible. If over 30 years, 40 years, whatever. If, on the other hand, you correlate national income with Brooklyn income, there's a lot of variation all over the place. Right? So you can therefore conclude that Brooklyn is the key. Right? Not investment. How will investment? The multiplier. The investment is equal to income equal investment plus consumption. This is 95, this is 5. The multiplier is 20. This is the famous Keynesian multiplier. The conclusion was if you increase investment, and government spending, remember, is the same as investments, honorary investment, this will increase national income by 20-fold. This was the original heady days of early Keynesianism. Right? So, well, here we have a much more powerful multiplier. Brooklyn, we have 100-fold. You give $10 to every resident of Brooklyn, you have a $2 trillion increase in national income. Okay? And this is a multiplier effect. It's a stable multiplier.
I think you should pull what Murray Rothbard.
I did. That's the punchline.
Yeah.
Anticipate you're stepping on my punchline. So Brooklyn is a volatile, free will people, volatile, free willing. Everybody else is a schnook who's out there and passive and determined. And of course, as you said, the conclusion of the whole thing is the Rothbard multiplier, much more powerful. Okay? If you take national income equals Rothbard income plus everybody else except Rothbard, EV. You correlate them. You prove that this correlation between national income and everybody else's income is very stable. You can't see any difference. You correlate my income and national income, almost no correlation at all. I'm that. Therefore, I have free will, I'm volatile, and everything else. Everybody else is schnucky, passive, and determined. Give me $1 and I'll refashion the universe. National income will go up by $2-3 trillion.
We give you $1 million, right?
Right. Exactly. That's it. Give me money, and all good things will come under you.
Clearly solved the problem. This is what Trudeau works.
What's that?
Yeah. This is what Trudeau works.
So this is there's nothing, and the Keynesians cannot rebut this. This is a reductio ad absurdum of Keynesianism. There's no way they can counter this except saying, "Well, it's ridiculous." You didn't mean that. So, at any rate, I think it's pretty clear this time. This whole thing is a one big gigantic scam. Yeah. The question then becomes, if the government is supposed to pump in deficits during the recession and sop up our purchasing power during the boom, first place, how do they arrange the deficits? Well, Keynesians themselves say it doesn't make any difference, just have a deficit. But it became pretty clear to people who sort of semi-Keynesian or whatever that it makes a certain amount of difference here. If you borrow money from, the government borrows money from capitalists or public, it's true the government will spend, say, $100 million, but it might be offset by $100 million not spent by these other people. They could have spent money. They could have had their own multiplier. Of course, they're supposed to be determined and passive, but still there's a certain worry there that you're at least potentially reducing the public spending by government spending more. Therefore, the thing to do if you're sort of a moderate Keynesian or semi-Keynesian is to have the government specifically have deficits by printing more money, by creating more money. You'll be sure to have new spending, raising the whole expenditure function. So that's sort of a modification. Now, there's supposed to be surpluses during the boom, which never happened. That sort of washes out. Then Keynesians separated into several categories. Most people think of Keynesians as all left liberals. It's not necessarily true. As a matter of fact, the people who brought us the Ford administration, the Nixon administration, and now most of the Reagan administration are Keynesians. They're conservative Keynesians. So what is it's a different aspect of the same doctrine. So how does this work? Well, let's say you have to the left of the full employment line, you're at 200 and you're supposed to be 300. So the desideratum is you want a government deficit of $100 billion, right, to put you up to the line.